The gunshot echoed through the valley as Tanner O'Malley missed the deer by a hair's breadth, his frustration manifesting in a heavy sigh that clouded the crisp autumn air of Wyoming Territory, 1879. At 32, his once steady hands had grown weary from working the ranch by day and tending bar at Silverton's only saloon by night, leaving little time for hunting to feed his two young children waiting at home. "Damn it all," Tanner muttered, lowering his rifle. The sun was already beginning its descent behind the jagged mountains, painting the vast landscape in hues of amber and gold. He needed to head back empty-handed again, something that had become all too common since Emily had passed from fever last winter, leaving him alone with 6-year-old James and 4-year-old Sarah. The ride back to his modest homestead was quiet except for the rhythmic hoofbeats of his chestnut mare, Penny. As the small log cabin came into view, smoke curling from its chimney against the darkening sky, Tanner felt the familiar tightness in his chest. His neighbor Mrs. Henderson, a widow in her 60s who watched the children while he worked, would be expecting payment soon, money he barely had. "Pa," James called out, running from the cabin with Sarah close behind, her rag doll clutched tightly in her small hands. Their faces, though smudged with dirt, lit up at the sight of him, momentarily lifting the weight from his shoulders. "Any luck, Mr. O'Malley?" Mrs. Henderson asked from the doorway, her weathered face kind but tired. Tanner shook his head. "Not today." He dismounted, scooping Sarah up with one arm while ruffling James's sandy hair with his free hand. "Thank you for watching them." After Mrs. Henderson left, promising to return the next morning, Tanner prepared a meager supper of beans and the last of their cornbread. The children ate quietly, sensing their father's worry despite his attempts to hide it. "Pa, I can help more," James offered, his small face serious beyond his years. "I could take care of the chickens all by myself." Tanner's throat tightened. "You already do plenty, son." He cleared their tin plates. "Now, time for bed. I've got to head to the saloon soon." After tucking the children in and extracting a promise from James to come fetch him if anything happened, Tanner mounted Penny once more and rode the 3 miles into town, the cold night air biting at his face, numbing his exhaustion. Silverton was a small but growing town, nestled between rolling hills and sprawling ranchland. The Golden Nugget Saloon stood at its center, a 2-story wooden building with peeling paint that glowed with warm lamplight on this particular evening. "You're late, O'Malley," grumbled Frank Wilson, the saloon's owner, as Tanner entered through the back door. "Sorry," Tanner replied, hanging his coat and hat. "The kids save it," Frank interrupted, though not unkindly. "Just get behind the bar. We've got a stagecoach full of passengers tonight." The saloon was indeed busier than usual, filled with the regular ranch hands, miners, and a group of travelers who'd arrived on the afternoon stage. Tanner moved efficiently behind the bar, pouring whiskey and beer, his mind half on his tasks and half on his sleeping children miles away. It was nearing midnight when the saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of cold air and a woman Tanner had never seen before. She stood hesitantly in the doorway, clutching a small valise, her auburn hair partially hidden beneath a modest bonnet. Something about her straight posture and the determined set of her jaw caught his attention. The room quieted as heads turned. Women rarely entered the Golden Nugget unless they were working girls from upstairs, and this woman, with her plain traveling dress and uncertain expression, was clearly neither local nor that sort. "Can I help you, miss?" Frank called out, stepping forward. "I'm looking for lodging," she replied, her voice clear and confident despite her obvious discomfort. "The hotel seems to be full with the stage passengers." Frank shook his head. "No rooms here, madam. This ain't that kind of establishment for a lady such as yourself." Tanner watched as disappointment flashed across her face, noting the exhaustion in her green eyes. Without thinking, he spoke up. "Mrs. Henderson might have a room. Her house is just past the general store." The woman turned toward him, relief softening her features. "Thank you, sir." "Tanner O'Malley," he offered, surprising himself. He rarely engaged with strangers. "Rebecca Taylor," she replied with a small smile that transformed her face, lighting up her eyes in a way that made Tanner momentarily forget the glasses he was supposed to be washing. "I appreciate the help, Mr. O'Malley." As she turned to leave, Frank chuckled. "First time I've seen you talk to a woman since Emily Tanner, and she's a pretty one at that." Tanner didn't respond, returning to his work with renewed concentration, though the image of Rebecca Taylor's smile lingered in his mind throughout the long night. The following morning, after returning home just before dawn and catching a few hours of sleep, Tanner was awakened by a knock at the door. James was already up, attempting to stoke the dying fire, while Sarah remained curled in the small bed they shared in the cabin's only bedroom. Opening the door, Tanner was surprised to find Mrs. Henderson standing there with Rebecca Taylor beside her. "Morning, Tanner," Mrs. Henderson said briskly. "This here's Miss Taylor. She's looking for work, and I mentioned you might need help with the young ones." Tanner ran a hand through his disheveled hair, acutely aware of his rumpled appearance. "Mrs. Henderson, I can barely afford your help as it is." "That's just it," the older woman continued. "My sister in Denver is ailing. I need to go to her maybe for some months. Miss Taylor here is a schoolteacher from Boston. She can watch your children and teach them their letters too." Rebecca stepped forward. "Mr. O'Malley, I understand your hesitation, but I truly need the position. I've come west for a fresh start. I don't require much payment, just room and board, and perhaps a small wage when you can manage it." Tanner studied her in the morning light. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s, with a smattering of freckles across her nose and a determined set to her chin. Everything about her spoke of the East, her accent, her posture, the quality of her clothing despite its simplicity. "You're a long way from Boston, Miss Taylor." Something flashed in her eyes, pain perhaps, or resolve. "Yes, and I intend to stay that way." Before Tanner could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Upon seeing Rebecca, the little girl stared openly. "Hello there," Rebecca said softly, kneeling to the child's level. "What's your name?" "Sarah," came the shy reply. "Are you an angel? Ma's an angel now." Rebecca's expression softened. "No, sweetheart, I'm Miss Taylor. I'm a teacher." "Can you teach me to read like James?" Sarah asked, her earlier shyness forgotten. "I certainly can," Rebecca promised, glancing up at Tanner with a question in her eyes. Against his better judgment, Tanner nodded. "We can try it for a week. But the cabin's small, Miss Taylor. Just one bedroom for the children, and I sleep by the fire." "I'll manage," she assured him. "And please call me Rebecca." That evening, as Tanner prepared to leave for the saloon, he watched Rebecca moving about the cabin with surprising efficiency. She'd already organized the few dishes they owned, swept the dirt floor, and was now teaching James how to form letters on a small slate she'd produced from her valise. "I'll be back by dawn," Tanner said, settling his hat on his head. "James knows to get help from the nearest neighbor if there's trouble." Rebecca nodded, her hands covered in flour as she kneaded dough on their small table. "We'll be fine, Mr. O'Malley. Go earn your wages." The smell of fresh bread hit him as he opened the door, a scent so achingly familiar yet long absent from his home that it stopped him in his tracks. Emily had baked bread every other day before she fell ill, filling their modest cabin with warmth and the promise of comfort. "You bake," he stated unnecessarily. Rebecca smiled. every day back home. It's the least I can do to thank you for the shelter." For the first time in months, Tanner rode to town with something lighter than dread sitting in his chest. The week passed quickly, each day establishing a new rhythm to the O'Malley household. Tanner would return from the saloon at dawn, sometimes finding Rebecca already awake, kneading dough or preparing a simple breakfast. He would sleep until midday, then work the small ranch mending fences, tending to the few cattle and horses he owned, chopping wood while Rebecca taught the children their letters and numbers. What surprised him most was the laughter that had returned to the cabin. He would catch snippets of stories Rebecca told, hear Sarah's giggles or James's excited exclamations as they learned something new. The cabin, which had felt like a hollow reminder of his failure since Emily's death, was slowly coming back to life. On the 8th day, as Tanner prepared to ride into town to work his evening shift at the saloon, Rebecca approached him by the corral. "Mr. O'Malley," she began, twisting her apron in her hands. "Tanner," he corrected her. "If I'm to call you Rebecca, you should use my given name." She nodded, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Tanner, then. I wondered if you might take me into town tomorrow. I need a few things from the general store." "Of course," he agreed readily. "But I should warn you folks will talk. A single woman living in a widower's home." Rebecca's chin lifted slightly. "I'm well acquainted with gossip, Mr. Tanner. It doesn't concern me what others think." There was a story there, Tanner realized. Something that had driven this educated Eastern woman to the wilds of Wyoming Territory, to accept a position in a stranger's home for little more than meals and a roof. "Tomorrow after I wake, then," he said, mounting Penny. As he rode toward town, he found himself wondering what Rebecca Taylor was running from, and why the thought of her leaving after Mrs. Henderson's return bothered him so much. The following afternoon, they rode into Silverton together, the children staying with a neighboring rancher's wife for a few hours. Rebecca sat behind Tanner on Penny, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist, maintaining a proper distance despite the necessity of their shared mount. "It's beautiful country," she commented as they crested a hill overlooking the town nestled in the valley below. "So different from Massachusetts." "What brought you all the way out here?" Tanner asked, the question that had been on his mind for days finally finding voice. There was a long pause before Rebecca answered. "A broken engagement, scandal. The usual things that send young women fleeing across a continent." Despite her light tone, Tanner detected real pain beneath her words. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she replied, her voice strengthening. He proved himself unworthy long before the wedding. Better to discover it beforehand than after. They rode in companionable silence the rest of the way into town. As predicted, their arrival together drew curious looks and whispers. Tanner helped Rebecca down from Penny in front of Wilcox's general store, acutely aware of the eyes watching from the boardwalk and windows. "I won't be long," Rebecca assured him, straightening her skirts. "Perhaps half an hour," Tanner nodded. "I'll be at the livery checking on a new horse I'm considering. Take your time." As Rebecca disappeared into the store, Tanner headed toward the livery stable at the end of the street. He'd barely gone 20 paces when Sheriff Tom Porter fell into step beside him. "Quite the looker you've got staying with you, Tanner," the sheriff commented, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "She's the children's teacher," Tanner replied evenly. "Temporary arrangement while Mrs. Henderson's away." Porter nodded slowly. "Uh-huh. And I suppose her being pretty as a picture has nothing to do with it." Tanner stopped walking. "She needed work. I needed help. It's nothing more than that, Tom. If you say so." The sheriff shrugged. "Just passing along that there's talk. You might want to consider appearances is all." "For the children's sake." Before Tanner could respond, a commotion from the general store drew their attention. Raised voices spilled onto the street, followed by Rebecca backing out the door, her face flushed with anger. "You keep your distance, Charles Richardson," she was saying firmly to a well-dressed man who followed her onto the boardwalk. "I told you I want nothing to do with you." The man, handsome, with the polished look of wealth about him, grasped her arm. "Be reasonable, Rebecca. I've traveled all this way. Your father sent me to bring you home." Tanner was moving before he registered the decision, covering the distance in long strides. "Problem here, Miss Taylor?" he asked, positioning himself between Rebecca and the stranger. "No problem at all," the man said smoothly, extending his hand. "Charles Richardson, and you are?" "Tanner O'Malley," he replied without accepting the handshake. "Miss Taylor is under my employment and protection." Richardson's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed Tanner, taking in his worn clothes, the calluses on his hands, the weathered lines of his face. "I see. Well, Mr. O'Malley, Miss Taylor and I have a prior arrangement. Her father is most anxious for her return to Boston." "That arrangement ended when I found you with Eliza Peterson," Rebecca said coldly. "And my father has no say in my life anymore. I'm 24 years old." The sheriff had joined them now, his hand casually resting near his holster. "Everything all right here?" "Perfectly fine, Sheriff," Richardson said with a tight smile. "Just a misunderstanding between old friends." "Rebecca?" Tanner questioned, looking to her for guidance. "I'm ready to leave," she said firmly, clutching her small parcel from the store. Mr. Richardson was just heading back to his hotel to prepare for his journey back east. Alone. Richardson's confident expression faltered slightly. "This isn't over, Rebecca." "Your reputation is no concern of yours," she interrupted. "Goodbye, Charles." Tanner helped Rebecca mount Penny, then swung up behind her, aware that this time she sat closer to him, her posture rigid with anger or perhaps fear. As they rode out of town, he could feel her trembling slightly. "You want to tell me what that was about?" he asked gently once they were well away from town. Rebecca was silent for so long that Tanner thought she might not answer. Finally, she sighed. "Charles was my fiancé. I discovered him with my cousin a week before our wedding." "I'm sorry," Tanner said, the words inadequate for the betrayal she'd experienced. "The worst part wasn't even the betrayal," Rebecca continued, her voice steadier now. "It was discovering that my father knew of Charles's tendencies. He overlooked them because the Richardson family owns half of Boston's shipping interests." She laughed bitterly. "My happiness was apparently a fair trade for expanded business opportunities." Tanner guided Penny off the main trail toward a small creek where they could rest before continuing home. Once they dismounted, Rebecca paced along the water's edge, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm afternoon sun. "I couldn't stay," she explained. "Not after everyone took his side, my father, our church, even friends I'd known my entire life. Charles convinced them I was being hysterical, imagining things." She shook her head. "So I left, used my savings to buy a ticket as far west as I could go, and now he's found me." "He won't bother you again," Tanner said with quiet certainty. Rebecca looked at him sharply. "You can't know that." "I can, because I won't let him." The simplicity and conviction in Tanner's voice surprised even him. He hadn't protected someone truly protected them since Emily fell ill. The feeling was both foreign and achingly familiar. Something shifted in Rebecca's expression, gratitude, perhaps, or relief. She stepped closer, hesitating just a moment before placing her hand lightly on his forearm. "Thank you, Tanner." The touch sent warmth spreading through him, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried with Emily. Uncomfortable with the sudden intensity of emotion, Tanner stepped back. "We should head home. The children will be waiting." The ride back was quiet, but the silence between them had changed. Charged with unspoken questions and possibilities neither was ready to voice. 2 weeks passed, during which Charles Richardson made no further appearances in Silverton. Life at the O'Malley homestead settled into a comfortable routine. Rebecca's presence had transformed the cabin in subtle ways. Curtains made from flour sacks hung in the windows, wildflowers adorned the table, and the constant aroma of fresh bread filled the air. Most notably, laughter echoed within the walls again, not just from the children but from Tanner as well. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Rebecca found Tanner on the small porch, whittling a wooden horse for Sarah's upcoming birthday. "You have quite a talent," she commented, settling on the step beside him, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. Tanner shrugged. "Just something to keep my hands busy." "Your children adore you," Rebecca said softly. "James tries so hard to be like you." "Did you notice he started standing exactly as you do, with his thumbs hooked in his belt?" Tanner smiled. "That boy's growing up too fast, taking on too much." "Like his father," Rebecca observed, her gaze direct. "2 jobs, Tanner, the ranch and the saloon. When do you rest?" "When the children are grown and fed," he replied simply. "Until then, I do what needs doing." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "I received a letter from Mrs. Henderson today. Her sister is improving, but slowly. She asked if I would consider staying on longer." Tanner's hand stilled on the carving. "And will you?" "That depends," Rebecca said carefully. "Am I still needed here?" The question hung between them, layered with meaning beyond the practical consideration of childcare. Tanner set down his knife and the half-finished horse. "Yes," he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than he'd intended. "The children, they've grown attached to you." "Just the children?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Tanner could form a response, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the evening stillness. He stood, instinctively moving Rebecca behind him as he peered into the gathering darkness. 2 riders emerged from the shadows, Charles Richardson and a man Tanner didn't recognize. Both were dressed for travel, their horses dusty from the road. "Mr. O'Malley," Richardson called, his voice carrying a false cordiality. "I apologize for the late hour. I've come to make a final appeal to Miss Taylor." Rebecca stepped around Tanner. "There's nothing to discuss, Charles. Please leave." Richardson dismounted, approaching the porch with confident strides. "I'm afraid I must insist. Your father has fallen ill, Rebecca. He's asking for you." Tanner felt Rebecca tense beside him. "My father was in perfect health when I left." "That was months ago," Richardson countered smoothly. "Things change, people change." He glanced at Tanner. "I've had time to reflect on my indiscretions. I've come to make amends, to bring you home where you belong." "She belongs where she chooses," Tanner said quietly. Richardson's pleasant facade slipped slightly. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Rebecca comes from a world you can't begin to understand. Look at this place." He gestured dismissively at the modest cabin. "Is this really the life you want, Rebecca? Teaching brats in the wilderness?" "Those brats are my children," Tanner said, his voice dangerously low. "And I love teaching them," Rebecca added firmly. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Charles. Not now, not ever." Richardson's companion dismounted, his hand drifting toward the gun at his hip. "Mr. Richardson didn't ride 2,000 miles to leave empty-handed, madam." "You're making a mistake," Tanner warned, his own hand moving toward the rifle propped against the porch railing. "The only mistake," Richardson said coldly, "was assuming you'd be reasonable. Johnson, convince Mr. O'Malley to mind his own business." The second man stepped forward, drawing his pistol with practiced ease. Before he could level it, however, a shot rang out from the darkened doorway of the cabin. The man yelped in surprise as the bullet splintered wood by his feet. James stood in the doorway, Tanner's old army revolver clutched in his small hands, his face a mixture of determination and fear. "Leave my pa alone." In the moment of stunned silence that followed, Tanner lunged for his rifle, training it on Johnson. "Drop the gun and step back." Johnson complied slowly, his eyes wary. "Now you," Tanner said to Richardson, "mount up and ride out, don't come back." Richardson's handsome face contorted with fury. "This isn't over." "Rebecca belongs to herself," Rebecca interrupted, stepping forward, "and I choose to stay here with Tanner and the children." The declaration hung in the air, surprising Tanner as much as it clearly enraged Richardson. "You'd choose this cowboy and his brats over everything I can offer," Richardson spat. Rebecca's voice was steady and clear in the night air. "In a heartbeat." For a tense moment, it seemed Richardson might refuse to leave. Then, with a final venomous glare, he mounted his horse. "You'll regret this when you're old and worn out from hard living, Rebecca. When your pretty hands are calloused and your face is lined from sun and wind." "Better that than living a lie with you," she replied evenly. After the two men rode away, Tanner gently took the revolver from James's trembling hands. "That was brave, son, but dangerous. Never handle a gun unless I'm with you, understand?" James nodded solemnly. "He was going to hurt you." "No one's hurt," Rebecca assured him, kneeling to embrace the boy. "Now back to bed. Sarah's probably frightened." Once James had returned inside, Tanner turned to Rebecca. "Did you mean what you said about choosing to stay?" In the silver moonlight, her face was both vulnerable and resolved. "Every word." "It's a hard life here," Tanner warned. "Nothing like Boston. The winters are brutal, the work never ends, and there's precious little luxury." Rebecca stepped closer. "I found things here worth more than all the luxuries of Boston." "What things?" Tanner asked, his voice rough with emotion he'd kept buried for too long. "Children who see the world with wonder. Work that matters." She reached up, her palm warm against his weathered cheek. "A man of honor who works 2 jobs to feed his children, who puts everyone else before himself." Tanner covered her hand with his own. "I haven't been able to offer much." "You've offered everything that matters," Rebecca whispered. "A home, purpose, the chance to be part of something real." The distance between them disappeared as Tanner lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that began hesitantly but quickly deepened with months of unacknowledged longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tanner rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Emily died," he admitted. "Didn't think I had the right." "She would want you to be happy," Rebecca said softly, "to give your children a mother who loves them." "Is that what you want, to be their mother?" Tanner asked, hardly daring to hope. Rebecca's answer was another kiss, this one filled with promise. Spring turned to summer, summer to autumn, and by the first snowfall of winter, Rebecca Taylor had become Rebecca O'Malley in a simple ceremony at the town church. Mrs. Henderson, returned from Denver, had wept happily while holding Sarah's hand. James had stood tall beside his father, chest puffed with importance as he presented the rings. The O'Malley cabin was transformed, not just by the physical improvements Tanner had made adding a proper bedroom for Rebecca and himself, expanding the main room, but by the life that now filled it daily. Rebecca's bread continued to warm the home each morning, but it was her laughter, mingling with that of the children and increasingly with Tanner's own, that truly made the cabin a home. With Rebecca teaching at Silverton's newly established school, bringing in a steady income, Tanner was able to give up his job at the saloon, focusing entirely on the ranch, which prospered under his undivided attention. The extra time allowed him to be present for his family in ways he'd thought impossible just a year earlier, On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, the family gathered around the fireplace. Sarah, now 5, sat on Rebecca's lap, listening intently as she read from a visit from St. Nicholas. James, 7 and increasingly serious about his responsibilities on the ranch, leaned against Tanner's side, fighting sleep despite his insistence that he was too old for naps. As Rebecca's voice filled the warm cabin with tales of sugar plums and tiny reindeer, Tanner watched his family, the children he'd struggled so desperately to provide for, and the woman whose love had saved them all from a half-life of mere survival. When the story ended and the children finally succumbed to sleep, Rebecca joined Tanner by the window, where he stood watching the snow transform their land into a glistening wonderland. "Penny for your thoughts," she said softly, slipping her hand into his. "Just thinking about how different things were last Christmas," Tanner replied, drawing her close. "How empty this place was, even with the children in it, how empty I was." Rebecca rested her head against his shoulder. "And now it's full, I'm full." He turned to face her, his hands gentle on her waist. "Thank you for choosing us." "Best decision I ever made," she said, her smile illuminating the room more brightly than the fire. "And I have something to tell you, a Christmas gift that can't be wrapped." Tanner raised an eyebrow questioningly. Rebecca took his hand and placed it over her still flat stomach. "Come summer, there'll be another O'Malley in this cabin." Joy spread through Tanner like wildfire, and as he pulled his wife into an embrace, he silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought this Eastern schoolteacher to his door just when they'd needed each other most. Outside, the Wyoming winter raged on, but inside the cabin, filled with bread and laughter and love, spring had already arrived.